Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep, really deep, into the inner workings of our minds with, you guessed it, Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow.
It's a classic.
It is, it really is. This deep dive is all about uncovering those often hidden mental processes behind every decision we make.
Right.
And trust me, getting to know these processes can lead to some pretty surprising aha moments about ourselves.
Yeah,
So are you ready to really get to know how your brain ticks?
let's do it. Kahneman's big idea is that we actually use two distinct systems for thinking.
Okay, two systems.
Yeah, two systems, and he calls them, as I'm sure many of you know, System 1 and System 2.
Catchy names.
So think of System 1 as your brain's autopilot, always on, reacting quickly, instinctively, based on gut feeling.
Okay, so like when you swerve to avoid another car on the road.
Exactly. Or understanding a simple sentence without even thinking about it.
Got it. System one. And then what about system two?
Well, System 2 is more like your inner Sherlock Holmes, slowly and deliberately analyzing situations. It's the system that kicks in when you're solving a complex math problem or planning a big project.
So system one is speed, and system two is like deep thought.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the book's not about saying one system is better than the other. It's really focused on highlighting all the ways System 1 or autopilot can sometimes lead us astray.
Ooh, interesting. So system one makes mistakes. Tell me more. How does that happen?
Well, System 1, being all about speed and efficiency, loves to take shortcuts. Kahneman calls these shortcuts heuristics, mental shortcuts that are super useful most of the time. They let us make quick judgments without getting bogged down in details.
Sounds efficient.
It is. But the catch is, these heuristics can sometimes lead to systematic errors in our thinking.
Oh, okay. I'm sensing a but here. So these mental shortcuts backfire sometimes. Can you give us an example of how that happens?
Absolutely. One example Kahneman gives is the example of, well, someone named Mindik. Imagine I ask you, will Mindik be a good leader? She is intelligent and strong.
Hmm. Well, just based on that, I'd say, yeah, probably. Mindic sounds like leadership material.
Right, that's System 1 kicking in. It jumps to conclusions based on very limited information, right? So we automatically picture Mindik as confident, competent, a good leader. But what if I continue that sentence and say, but she's also corrupt and cruel?
Oh, wow, yeah. Okay, that changes everything. Now, my initial impression of Mindic seems totally wrong because I only had part of the story.
Exactly. That's how these heuristics can trip us up. We make judgments without having the full picture, and those snap judgments aren't always accurate.
I see. So it's like judging a book by its cover, which we all know we shouldn't do. I can already see how this plays out in everyday life.
Oh, absolutely. And another great example is the halo effect. System 1 loves to create a coherent story, find patterns, even if it has to fill in the blanks with assumptions. So if we find someone attractive, we might unconsciously assume they're also intelligent and kind, even though there's no evidence to support that.
So system one is like weaving these narratives in our heads based on very flimsy evidence. It's amazing how much is happening under the surface that we're not even aware of. So how does this tendency to see patterns and jump to conclusions affect how we deal with, let's say, statistics?
It turns out our intuition, that gut feeling, it's not always the best guide when it comes to statistics. System 1, remember, loves patterns.
Right.
It tends to look for those patterns even when they don't actually exist.
So you're saying my brain isn't a statistics whiz. Bummer.
Well, not exactly. It's more like we're wired for stories, not for spreadsheets.
Now,
Kahneman gives this really interesting example about kidney cancer rates in the U.S.
okay, kidney cancer rates.
The counties with the lowest incidence of kidney cancer, you know what they are. They're mostly rural, small populations.
Interesting. What's the common assumption there?
Well, most people would probably guess it has something to do with a healthier lifestyle, right? Clean air, fresh food, less stress, all that.
Makes sense to me.
Right. It's a logical assumption. But the real reason is actually much simpler. It all boils down to those smaller populations in those counties. Statistically speaking, smaller samples, they're just more likely to have extreme results,
Okay.
both high and low.
So it's not necessarily about the healthy lifestyle, but just random chance because of the smaller sample size.
Exactly. We see a pattern, we want to explain it with a story, but sometimes the simplest explanation is just good old statistical variation. It's a good reminder that correlation doesn't always equal causation.
Right, right. Okay, I see how easily we can misinterpret things. So this tendency to see patterns where there might not be any, how does that play out in other parts of our lives?
Well, Think about how often we form opinions, strong opinions, based on just a handful of personal experiences or anecdotes.
Yeah, all the time.
Right. This is where we get to what Kahneman calls the law of small numbers,
Law of small numbers.
which basically means we tend to overgeneralize from very limited data.
So, like, if I see a few people doing something, I might assume everyone's doing it?
Yeah, exactly. And it happens all the time. We draw conclusions from a couple of news stories, a few online reviews, conversations with a small group of
Oh,
friends.
yeah.
But those small samples, they might not be representative of the bigger picture at all.
That makes a lot of sense. So, is it even possible to make truly rational decisions if our brains are, so prone to these statistical errors?
Well, that's where Kahneman's work gets even more interesting. He argues that the traditional economic model of humans as perfectly rational decision makers, these econs, as he calls them.
Icons.
Yeah, econs.
Okay.
He says it's flawed.
So we're not these, like, Spock-like creatures who always make the most logical choice.
Not quite. In reality, our emotions, they play a huge role in our decisions, especially when we're dealing with risk and uncertainty. And this is where Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky developed what they call prospect theory.
Prospect theory. Okay, so what is that?
Well, it basically says our emotions, especially that fear of loss, they can really sway our choices.
Okay, so fear of loss over logic. Can you give me an example?
Imagine this. Would you rather receive $900 for sure or take a 90% chance of winning $1,000?
Ooh, that's tough. I think I'd go for the guaranteed $900, to be honest.
Most people would. We instinctively prefer the certainty of a smaller gain over a riskier but potentially larger one, right? But now let's flip it. Would you rather lose $900 for sure or take a 90% chance of losing $1,000?
Okay, In that case, I think I'd gamble. Take the 90% chance.
Exactly. When we're faced with a potential loss, we suddenly become much more risk averse. We're willing to gamble, even if it means risking a bigger loss, just to avoid the certainty of that smaller loss.
Wow. Yeah, I can see how that plays out in so many situations. Like people holding on to losing stocks, hoping they'll rebound, even though it might be more rational to just, cut their losses.
Perfect example. Or think about negotiations. People are often more willing to give up more, make concessions, just to avoid a perceived loss than they are to secure an equivalent gain.
So loss aversion is like this powerful undercurrent in our decision making, even when we think we're being totally rational. This is really making me rethink everything.
Hmm.
Are there any other emotional biases we should be aware of?
Oh, there are so many. Loss aversion is just one. We also tend to overvalue things we already own. Kahneman calls this the endowment effect.
Endowment effect.
Yeah,
Are there-
it's that classic mine is better kind of thing. We become attached to what we have, and it suddenly seems way more valuable simply because we own it. Think about that old t-shirt, the one you never wear,
Yeah.
but you just can't bring yourself to get rid of it.
Well, I have a whole drawer of those. But it sounds like understanding all these biases, all these little quirks, might actually be the key to making better decisions. If we know the pitfalls, maybe we can avoid them.
Exactly. Awareness is the first step, right? Once we recognize these patterns, these tendencies in our thinking, then we can start to question our automatic responses and make more conscious choices.
So we don't have to be puppets of System 1. We can take control.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing those moments when System 1 might be leading us astray and then consciously engaging System 2 to, analyze the situation a bit more carefully.
So it's like we have this mental toolkit now. We know about these heuristics and biases so we can spot them in action and make more informed choices.
Precisely. And Kahneman actually takes this a step further with the concept of nudge.
Right, nudge. Remind me what that is again?
Well, the basic idea is that we can design environments or choice architectures that kind of subtly guide people towards better decisions without actually restricting their freedom of choice.
Can you give me an example? How does that work in real life?
Sure. Think about retirement savings plans. In some countries where enrollment in those plans is automatic, people are far more likely to actually save for retirement than in countries where they have to actively opt in.
Okay.
The choice is still there, but that default setting gently nudges them in a positive direction.
That's really interesting. So we can use these insights not just to, make better individual decisions, but also to actually design systems that benefit society as a whole.
Exactly. It's a really powerful concept with, implications for everything from public health campaigns to environmental policy to financial decision making. It's really quite broad.
Wow. This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've learned about the two systems of thinking, the power of heuristics, those sneaky biases, and even how to use nudges to guide ourselves and others, toward better choices. It's really been a fascinating journey.
It really has. It's been a pleasure exploring all these ideas with you. And if you're looking for a final takeaway, I'd say pay attention to your own decisions in the coming days. Ask yourself, which system is driving this choice? You might be surprised by what you discover.
That's a great challenge. And I hope everyone listening is inspired to pick up Thinking Fast and Slow to learn even more. It's a book that will truly change the way you think about thinking. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.